Right, this is going to be episode 51 of OverSight. Do that thing where you quickly run through the guests are and all that. So in the bottom left-hand corner, we've got Cuddles, who has been the coach of loads of teams, but now he's with the Guangzhou Charge, right?
Yep.
There we go. Enough said. Keep it short and sweet. That's how he got in the door. He's not a man of, he lets his work do the talking.
It's right, isn't it? I'm not going to correct you.
Exactly. Also worked with some other teams in the past, like I said, but whatever. We'll get into that in the episode. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, we've got Corey here, who is a DPS player for the Washington Justice. So give him a chance. Just give him a chance. The first split doesn't count. Everyone knows that. The first couple of stages, that's a what. It's like when you start playing again. The first game's a warm-up game. The results don't matter. What matters is that you stick with it, and then later, just look at the Shanghai Dragons. I mean, bad example. They changed all the players to really good players. All I'm saying is things can turn around, Corey. Just stick with it, mate.
Will do, man.
There we go.
Well, also, he's a DPS player that actually gets to play DPS now.
That's pretty cool.
Does make the team look a lot better.
Indeed. What do you think of that, Corey? How have you enjoyed the swap to the role lock?
It's been pretty good so far, I'd say. I'm definitely off of the Zarya role, which I've never played before. It's kind of new, coming to the league. But all my life I've been playing DPS heroes like Tracer, Widow, McCree, Hanzo, whatnot. But feels really good.
Okay. What have your initial thoughts been, Henry, of moving over to the role lock and some of the initial meta we've seen in actual OWL play?
I think it's great. I mean, it's actually been really nice to have the shuffle come through. You can see, you mentioned it multiple times on your different talks you've had on here, and just in general, it's nice to see the DPS players shine, especially for our guys, and things for Corey too, right? You can finally get yourself off Zarya. You're not locked into this weird hero that you've never played before, and you can actually play the heroes you've been playing for the past 2-3 years, right? So you can use what you are. If you're a specialist in a certain hero, you can play that now, and you don't feel restricted, which for me personally, from a strategic point of view, is really nice because I can actually use players that we picked up for that are actually really strong on DPS characters, and I don't have to teach them how to play Brig. And because
no one would do it willingly, so
yeah, actually from a coaching perspective, right? That's also a thing. I think Brig is an okay hero, now and where she's at, right? But I never really thought I would be teaching people how to play Brig, so I had to also kind of teach myself how to teach people how to play Brig at a high level. We had to really deep dive into that, and that's something that I wasn't used to doing either. And I think a lot of other coaches would say that too, and they might say that now the way that they think and the way that they look at DPS is completely skewed because they haven't actually had the chance to teach their team how to play DPS or play these dive comps or whatever in such a long time.
So from a coaching perspective, moving forward, how much easier does the role lock make it for you that exactly who has to play which hero now? Because that was one of my big arguments was you at least know that when a support hero is released that your support players are going to have to play it instead of, who knows, a DPS player or something like that, like we saw with Ghost.
As far as I can tell in the Outlaws, they used to just use that thing where you draw the straws and whoever gets the short one that week has to play it or something like that,
right? The Brigida or Tracer punishment, yes. So is this something that most coaches are excited about that you've been talking to?
Yeah, it's great. And just in general for scouting in the future and stuff, that's made it so much easier for us. And then academy settings and stuff, it's made it so much easier. Yeah, it's great. In general, it just keeps things more focused. You can have coaches that are dedicated primarily just to tanks, just to DPS, just to supports, and you can kind of keep it within that region. I know a lot of teams do that. We kind of keep it a little bit varied right now. But for the teams that do that, it's going to feel a little bit more focused instead of just, when we're running Ghosts, what's your DPS coach going to do? Teach someone how to print Brig? Yeah, okay.
And from your perspective, Corey, now you said you're back in. You're actually working on the heroes that you've played. Were you a hit scan player in other games before Overwatch?
I mostly played Counter-Strike. I have a lot of hours of that, and I was 15 or 16 or something. At the time, I was just playing ESEA, hanging out a lot of RW.
So in your perspective, is this more along the lines of what you want to do as an Overwatch professional? You want to just be sort of locked into that hit scan role, or was part of you enjoying learning Zarya or playing that role?
at first it was kind of fun, and then you kind of play it for a long time. You're like, wow, this is like doesn't have like the pizzazz that a DPS player like hero has. It's kind of like playing Bastion forever. Like we played Bastion for like a week to like prep against NYXL, and it was like fun for the first like 2 days, and then you realize like this hero is so boring. Like I can't like it's so.
That's one of those things that I wonder about, though, because I could see it going both ways when people come back to DPS. Like, on the one hand, I could, like, there's certain roles where I could see maybe it would, like, open your own mindset as to how other roles play the game and help you play it better. But I could also see a world in which it could actually create all these habits that make it way harder when you then switch back to being a DPS player to then the way your mind works to engage, to find a pick, to when to go all in, etc., in contrast to some of the other characters in the game.
I would say like it does kind of have that a little bit. Like when you first get back into it, you're like, wow, dude, my aim is so bad. Holy. And then the kind of like mind games and like 1v1s with like say for Widow especially, like reading your opponent is a lot harder like when you first do the switch, but after you play it for like a week or something, you kind of like, oh, like that's what I used to do. These are my old habits, and you kind of get back into it.
Okay.
I think you can say like, if you look at a player like Sinatra, right, you could have two ends of the spectrum. Like you have a player that never really played Zarya and never really peaked, and then you have a player like Sinatra that's like basically people are saying he's now the best Zarya in the world. And you can look at that and you can say, what impact is that gonna have on him when he comes back to playing DPS? Like, is he gonna be the Tracer player that he used to be? Because he was known for being one of the best Tracer players in the world. But sure. I'm not too sure what kind of impact that's gonna have on him, and it's gonna be on him and the coaching staff to try and wean himself back into how he used to play on Tracer. And is the way he used to play on Tracer going to be good like now in the meta that's kind of evolving?
Okay. Well, also, it's a question as we see a lot of these teams that are sort of starting to play players that we haven't seen in a very long time. Like we look at San Francisco and we see Striker and Architect coming back. Mm-hmm. We look at the Titans and we see Hureg, who's been benched for the entire season. Now he's part of the starting roster. And it feels like a lot of the players that are returning are ones that were sort of just sitting on the bench practicing hit scan heroes that were not really relevant because they were specialists or because they weren't on the starting roster. They were just doing what they've always done, basically.
Yeah.
Or in some cases like Genji as well. And it seems like these guys are coming back now because they were just practicing an entirely different skill set while they were waiting for the meta to change. And so that's given them, weirdly, being on the bench an advantage heading into the role lock compared to their teammates who have been, like you say with Sinatra, who's probably been playing nothing but Zarya for forever now.
You could say, yeah, it's like the redemption for those players that have been on the bench the whole time. It's like, oh, it's a blessing for us. We can finally I've just been grinding rank the whole time. I've just been grinding my Widow account, and then Widow comes into the meta. Like Taimu, for example, right. I remember listening to that like interview thing, the history thing you watched back like old games of them, and he was on Widow, and he was talking about, I don't even think I'm ever going to play ever again. Like, I don't know if I'm actually going to get on. And he mentioned that he's just been grinding Widow, and now that kind of pays off. He's just been playing his Widowmaker for this kind of thing to happen.
The person I feel sorry for, and this is just like a general comment, is the people out there who were on the bench and they were basically told, like, you won't get in the game until you know one of these heroes. And they have been grinding the whole time. And then the last week, they were starting to make some progress. And then it was like, role lock announced, coming in next day. They're like, what the fuck? And spent all that time. Because basically, like, the same thing happened in CSGO, where one of the best players we have in the game is a player for FaZe Clan called Nico. And when one of the weapons, the AUG, was very, very powerful in the meta, he just refused to use it because his logic, this will sound stupid, but there's players who think this way. His logic was, since it's so powerful, it is broken and so it will be nerfed. So what's the point in learning it? And then because he didn't learn it, everyone else was dominating with it. So then, right, the week that he started putting in all his effort, and he's a really good player, by the way, he could definitely have dominated. The week he actually started playing, they just announced like it was nerfed anyway. And it was like, what the fuck? If you'd just done this 3 months ago. So Must be brutal for the people who were just trying to get in, and now it's just back to DPS anyway. Actually, I want to ask, though, about the current meta from the first week, though, because when I heard Roll Lock coming, I have to admit, I was expecting everyone was just going to be playing literally like Season 1 dive. Like, I thought people would just go back to that. But I saw already some interesting variations, like in the NYXL Gladiators game, I saw both teams were playing Hammond sometimes. So what do you think of the current meta that's emerged? Like, is it settled at the moment? Is this what we should expect?
It's definitely not settled for sure. It's kind of like in that stage where people are like evolving and like just counterpicking, and there isn't like this one super strong comp like just yet. Like it kind of feels like you see a composition and you play like rock paper scissors, and then you basically kind of just go out as the game goes and like free flow. Lots of teams will be running like the Orisa comps, so with the Mei Hanzo or like the Mei Widow or like Orisa Double Sniper. And you see teams who play like dive against double sniper, but against like specific things. Like for example, we ran the Ryan Diva like Reaper May like counter dive basically, but it's like you can also go quick with it. But there's like counters to that as well that teams will stop to, and then you have to end up like swapping certain heroes to like make it so your comp's just not terrible. But there isn't like an OP comp just yet.
Sure.
Yeah, we're still kind of just waiting because right now we are in that stage of like everyone's kind of only had like 2 weeks of scrims. Everyone's just picking like the comp that it's like, oh, we just did 6 straight maps with Guangzhou and they just rolled us on this comp. We might as well copy it because we have nothing else for this weekend. Like there's stuff like that happens, and I think
Who
maybe
are you accusing of copying? You.
Oh, I'm not going to name any names, but
Really? You can't just drop that in there and not tell us who it is.
But yes, like stuff like that basically happens, and I think for a while we're going to see like a few more shuffles in like what comps are being run. Like the comps that you saw at the weekend, for example, the Hog with the Orisa and the Mei, like that is super strong right now because no one's really coordinated on like what comps there are. Like for us, for example, we're super like coordinated with that comp. Like we've been practicing it pretty damn hard. Like our front line, they're really coordinated, they're really focused, they know what they're doing, and it rolls through people because we know what we're doing. But as soon as some teams get back into the rhythm of they're having their coordinated dives, they're understanding like when to farm, when not to farm, when to look for blades, stuff like that, then that comp might start to get pushed out again, and then people will start having to play the counter pick game once again. But I don't think it's going to take... I think it's going to take longer this time for us to find like a hard meta or like whatever is going to be just the constant comp than previously.
And what's amazing to me is like I thought that Brigitte would be one of the big losers of the 2-2-2 lock, especially because we haven't actually balanced the game for 2-2-2 yet. Because remember that the 2-2-2 balance patch is on PTR right now. So the game is not really intended to be played this way. And especially with all those changes that are potentially coming to Brigitte, if all of them go through from the test realm, it will change her a lot. And so, I figured her healing output would be too low to be only one of 2 supports. But honestly, teams, especially on Control, have been doing a really good job of using Brigitte, especially with dive or flanking compositions with like Tracer, Sombra, Winston, Diva. And so it has been already more balanced than I thought it would be. And there's already, a pretty high amount of use of different heroes, and even heroes we haven't seen played all that much. Obviously, Mei was sort of up and coming towards the end of GOATS anyway. But if we look at, for example, Reaper on a lot of these control points, that's a bit of a surprise. What do you guys think the strengths of Reaper are now that we're in, especially on Control, now that we're seeing him so much?
So for Reaper, is like I've been playing him a lot, and I personally like have a blast with him. But his E currently is really, really strong. The moment you hit your E, like you can die when you're like using it, but when you show up, I think it's currently really hard to kind of time it. People don't really have the timing down. When you like show up in their back line and start killing them. If you ever find yourself in like a bad situation, you can shift away. But you don't always have to play like that. You can also play in a counter dive way where specifically against dive comps, you'll see teams swap the Reaper and they'll sit in the team, and dive has to kind of obviously dive your backline or like pressure you out in some way. But when a Reaper comes at your tanks, chunks you for half your health, and your dive is kind of pretty difficult.
So the change to the buff to his E, where it's a lot easier to use it now in various different situations. You're not necessarily such a sitting duck like you were before.
Yeah, you can use it like to be really creative, basically. You can use it to kind of like hide in certain spots and kind of assassinate backline when fights are going on, or literally just eating into a tank and shooting a tank is pretty viable too with the arrow, and just taking HP from the fight and then going back to your team for safety.
Are you enjoying the Reaper usage, Henry?
Yeah, and I think you're also seeing him because May's here. She's being played. So if you actually look way back when May Reaper was meta, the reason why Reaper was picked was because of May. Like, he's actually really good against May. He's good at harassing her. His Wraith form allows him to get out and get in when he needs to. And she doesn't really cause many problems for him. So a lot of the time you will see teams actually come off of him when they see May they don't pick May anymore. You might see him against, dive comps when they're trying to play counter dive, but not many teams are actually pulling that off either. So yeah, most of the time it's just because of May that you're seeing him.
Right. Well, if we talk about some of the teams then, this week I noticed already the results were all over the place when I was trying to follow stuff. So even when one team would win one game, they'd lose to another team afterwards. So I thought one area we could start with here, Henry, is since your team played against Boston and Philadelphia, which is exactly the same two teams that actually the Chengdu Hunters played against, maybe we could talk about it in that way. So what was, you played these two teams. What are Boston and Philadelphia like at the moment? Two teams, I think in terms of Philadelphia, people expected maybe great things when they came to the roll lock, right?
Yeah, I think Philly, they just maybe having some teething problems right now. I think they can still be pretty strong. They played well against us. We just excelled, I think, just a little bit above. On the day, I think Happy and Nero just outplayed EQO and Carpe in terms of, when it comes to skill and it comes to the mechanics that they had to do. If you look at, the first map against them, they played, that Reaper comp, which actually really messed with us. And then we adapted in the last map, and I feel like Philly as well they've always been a little bit slow to adapt, in my opinion. They've been slow to adapt to goats, and even in game they're just a little bit too slow to get a catch on to what's going on. And on top of our players just out mechanicking them, I think they have to try and get on top of that, otherwise they're going to end up losing more and more games, and it just carried over to their game against Chengdu. Boston though, I mean, I haven't really looked at them that much, even when we did scouting reports and stuff, in preparation for them. I did a base outline, but I still don't think they're in a great spot. I think they need to kind of understand what's their thing, who are their players they're going to play, where's the chemistry at, because in general they're just all over the place, and I don't want to answer how to fix them, but I don't know how to fix them, that. I don't care. We beat them, whatever. They're playing like trash right now. Free win, whatever. I'll take it. I'm not gonna fix how they need to play.
I do find it interesting because Color Hex is another player like you, Corey, that was picked up specifically for some really good mechanical skill and hit scan usage, and it seems like Boston really hasn't unleashed him in the same way that you are being successful on the Justice.
Yeah, he was kind of picked up for that. He's also I think his hero pool is more designed for flex DPS currently, and Boston does have a lot of flex DPS players. So I think kind of popping off as Widow or something is kind of difficult in his situation. I think recently for us, we've really been working on kind of coordinating with each other individually, especially in the DPS meta instead of in the Goats meta where you're doing it all as a team, and it's definitely been making everything a lot easier to kind of read the game and see what's going on, and kind of playing off of your other teammates who are doing stuff. I think Boston kind of just looks really uncoordinated, and don't really seem like they're really working together as a team individually. If you watch their play, at least from what I watched the Guangzhou game. I didn't watch the Fusion game.
Well, the Guangzhou game was the funniest, though, because Guangzhou subbed in 5 new players on map 4, and they only kept Nero in, and they still beat Boston. So that's why I was tweeting about, does Guangzhou have 2 teams that are better than Boston Uprising?
I tried to reply to that by saying, I reckon we could play 4 or 5, but I kept on spelling things wrong because I was so excited that we just absolutely destroyed them in under 30 minutes.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. I mean, that whole situation, we haven't really talked about it yet, but both teams, both of you guys have had interesting roster changes recently. So we can start with Guangzhou because you guys swapped with Philly. Mm-hmm. So you guys sent Kib over to Philly, which I guess isn't too surprising considering how well Nero's been playing, and he has like a lot of overlap with Kib from a projectile DPS role. And then you guys got Fraggy and Bishu. So what was the logic behind these roster changes that you made?
I mean, we pretty much now have like 2 teams under our belt. We never really had we never had a second main tank, right? Fraggy was just a good option for us. Like head coach wise, Jin was just, he just discussed that, we need another main tank, and we want something to kind of compete with Rio, and we also want the capability of having like the internal scrims. And Fraggy was just a good option for us. Bringing in more Western players too is something Guangzhou has always wanted to have, like a big mixture, because we're trying to breed like that mixed / Western cultural kind of thing going on, and trying to like force English speaking within the comms too. So having people like Fraggy, who's incredibly experienced, coming in, maybe not always getting stage time, which is probably not good. It's not going to happen. Like, he's not going to get loads of stage time just yet. He needs to get integrated, and Rio is on form. But yeah, bringing him in initially was to allow us to have someone that can be up Rio's ass the whole time. And if Rio's not performing well, then Fraggy can play. And now that we have 2 teams, it allows us to actually have both of them scrimming at the same time. And then for Bishu, it's kind of the same thing. There was no one really ever there to compete with Hopper. And knowing that 2-2-2 was coming up, we knew that we're going to want to have almost 2 of each role.
And also, I think, at least in Hotba's case, Hotba himself has not ever been he hasn't been a bad diva, but he hasn't been like a top tier diva or one of the diva mains. And Hoppa's flexibility was always his, Hoppa's strength was his flexibility, right? Mm-hmm. And he can't go over to the DPS anymore. I think luckily for you, Hoppa was one of the few tanks that was flexing onto Zarya, one of the few diva players who was flexing onto Zarya last stage. Yeah. So you actually got some pretty good. You ended up with Hotba playing Roadhog, Zarya, and Diva last stage when a lot of people weren't doing that. Mm-hmm. So he is still slotting in, it would seem, nicely. But it does suck, I think, for you guys. And this is one of the downsides is Hotba as a player, it was cool that he could play Pharah and Tracer and these other roles. And that gave you a really versatile weapon. And the downside of the rollout is you're not going to be able to really use that anymore.
Stratnera can do it instead.
I mean, I guess, but do you think Hoppa's going to improve at Diva if he has more time to
for sure,
practice just Diva?
Yeah. Definitely. And now he has someone like Bishu to kind of sit there and talk with and learn from. Everyone knows that Bishu's Diva is strong, right? So now having him on the sidelines, while Hoppa's learning, hey, we can throw him in if Diva becomes meta right now.
Okay. Monty, do you have concerns that Philadelphia lost the first 2 games? Because I noticed for this particular stage, they actually have a fairly forgiving schedule. If you look where they are overall in their division and the league, they're supposed to do work this stage and be a top team potentially.
I think the problem with Philadelphia is we needed to see them come out of the gates really strong, in my opinion, because if you're thinking about where the Atlantic division is, it is easier, right? But they're at 1 match over 500. They're 12-11 right now, but they have a -3 map differential. And I think, there's a possibility that they go ahead and they reach these play-ins. But what happens when they're in the play-ins? I mean, next week they play Houston and Toronto. Houston will probably be a tough game for them. Toronto, I think, is better than their results are showing. So that could be dangerous as well. What else? Paris, Vancouver, and then Seoul. Ooh.
Those last 3 could be hard.
Yeah. Yeah, that's... So they play Houston, Toronto, Paris, Vancouver, Seoul for their 5 games, and then they're not playing at the homestand in LA.
I mean, if you can't,
I don't know. This is a team that
if the potential to beat Seoul isn't there, you're not a playoff team. There's no point in worrying at that point in time.
Well, they might be a playoff team just because they have the easier schedule,
sure,
being the Atlantic Division. But at the same time, they needed to pick up these wins to show that they were a legitimate threat. And sure. I think even though EQO popped off a little bit in their last couple of games, a lot of that was because he was being given the nano boost a lot of the time onto his Hangzhou, which obviously will help him pop off pretty significantly. But I mean, I've never been a fan of Sato on this team. I think this team probably could use a lot of work. They are going to have players most likely next year, like Alarm, that I think are going to solve some of their issues. But I think they've always had somewhat big problems at the main tank position. And for whatever reason, Fraggy wasn't playing, allegedly because Carpe didn't want to play with him, though I don't know if that's true, or whether his form wasn't good. But it did seem kind of crazy that you wouldn't play him during a GOATS meta. And especially with Sado. It's not that Sado is necessarily bad. He's not great either. I just think he doesn't synergize very well with this roster. And he sort of just flies off and does his own thing, and he doesn't get a lot of support either. So either there's a communication issue, or I think maybe his play style is just a little bit off for the Philadelphia Fusion. So I don't know. I mean, this is a team that probably should have won. They were close to winning both of the matches. They took them both to map 5, but losing both, I think, is really hard. And this was sort of their chance for redemption, right? This is where they should have been motivated to play again. Because frankly, for most of the season, they looked like they just didn't even want to fucking play the game. Like, for me, that was the biggest thing, is that they felt, watching them play made me think that they were very unmotivated.
What do you think, Corey?
They didn't look like they wanted to be there.
I definitely see the motivation part. Maybe they're having some like internal struggles in some way, but I mean, like, I wasn't like gonna compare us to them. Like, yeah, it could be hard to get motivated, but they also like win quite often. So,
well, they win about 50% of the time.
I mean, you would think the motivation would be you have fucking EQO and Carpe, who are supposed to be two of the best DPSs, and they can actually play DPS now. Now should be when you go in whole hog.
I also think it could be like, it's not strictly just Widow Hanzo meta is something to like quite look at, because like, yeah, their Widow Hanzo are nasty, but like there's times where you have to play like Mei Hanzo and like Mei Reaper. It's like these weird heroes currently that just aren't kind of like they're known for hero pool. So I could see it like being awkward in that way, and it's a new meta, so like there's new things to, like, kind of consider, and they seem just a little lost. But I think as it kind of progresses, as soon as there's like a defined meta, they'll definitely come around and pop off.
Okay. Right. Being as earlier, I alluded to the fact that the teams that, well, Henry's team basically played the exact same. Oh, is everyone there? I thought everyone would like a second. Since that said, that the Charge played the exact same opponents as the Chengdu Hunters. What do you think of the Chengdu Hunters coming into Role Lock, Henry? Because obviously this was a team that famously, I won't say thrived under GOATs, because they basically were like some sort of weird antidote to GOATs. It's like that famous thing. Have you ever heard that story, Monty? Where apparently people in some part of Africa who had sickle cell anemia, it would actually help them because it somehow, like, I think it was like malaria or something, couldn't survive within people who had sickle cell anemia. So even though it is a net negative to have sickle cell anemia as like a genetic condition, it did help you not completely die from malaria. So it was in some weird sense good. That's how I saw the Chengdu Hunters in the GOATs meta. They were never going to win, but they weren't going to lose the most. And whatever the fuck they were doing sort of worked enough that I could accept it. So in this kind of context, why are they actually all right in 2-2-2? What's going on?
I mean, I was skeptical about how good they would be in 2-2-2 because they were running a lot of triple DPS compositions, and that was kind of their bread and butter. And they didn't really have, like, Elsa at the time was not a super strong diva player, and I was wondering if they. So there were a few things I was wondering. If they didn't have a good diva player, then how were they going to run Ball? Because you need some sort of mobile tank to run with Ball. And so Elsa actually has stepped up. I thought Elsa had a very good week on Diva, which was good to see. And then also, what did Orisa look like from Among? And he didn't look like a terrible Orisa. I mean, it wasn't obviously like gesture level, but I thought it was a serviceable job, just like his Reinhardt was serviceable when they really needed it. So I think Chengdu, they continue to run a bunch of weird compositions. I was casting their match versus Philadelphia where they had 3 different players play Doomfist, which I've literally never seen before. So that was exciting and interesting. So they definitely still have their own style, and they're still going to be running a lot of these pick compositions or highly mobile compositions, and it seems like it's working for them. So I guess the question of their adaptation was really around the two questions of whether they have a good enough diva player, which at least in the very limited sample size that we have, it looks like Elsa is going to be okay, and to pair with Among's Wrecking Ball. And then the other question was, can Among play Orisa so they can actually go back on some of these Orisa hog compositions? And it looked like it was going okay for them too. They haven't had the toughest opponents, so who knows what they're going to look like in the rest of the stage. They play Gladiators and NYXL next week. I think that's going to be a much better test of them, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically it for Chengdu. It's just like, as long as their tank line can play at an average level, then their DPS players just have to play like the animals that they are. Like, they just play like out of their minds basically every single game. As long as that continues at like a base level, they should be fine. Like, they'll sit like mid-table. If they want to like start pushing for the top, then yeah, they might need to look for either new tanks or making sure those tanks that they have can play what's currently meta, or whatever you want to call that right now. But because they have those DPS players that can pull out a Doomfist or a Genji that just absolutely demolishes by itself, then they should be fine.
I do find it funny that when we watch Chengdu, like, everybody tries to run all these Doomfist counters and they still can't stop Jinmu. Like, they just can't fucking stop him from killing them.
That's that hero, right? That hero is crazy. He snowballs out of control. Like, if you put someone on him that's just an absolute Doomfist sweat, like, nah, good night. Like, you're not winning. I
just like seeing when there's like a Sombra and like a Brigida out there, and they're like trying to CC, like an Ana, and they're like trying to CC Doomfist desperately, and Jinmu just dodges everything and then just ruins you. It is really entertaining to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a question for you that someone hasn't asked in a long time. Is Paris Eternal actually good?
I think if they take the cobwebs off, they might be.
They're not terrible for sure. I think they have the DPS players playing the meta. Their tank lines actually looks decent, in my opinion.
I saw that Wolf on Twitter, like the way he phrased it was as though he was some old man who's like lost the love of his family, you know, they'd all left him alone. He was just in a broken down house. Then one day his son came back like, Dad, I just want to fix things before you die. That's what Wolf was like when he saw Soon actually popping off as like a DPS player. Like the joy that flowed from his heart that day.
It really is sad seeing Soon not being able to pop off on Widow like he used to. Like, literally last season, right, when we had him on My Valiant, like, he was an animal. Like, he was actually an animal. And now you see him in season 2, and it's just like, wow, what happened, man? Like,
I mean, he had a really good game versus Valiant.
Yeah, he did. He did have a good game, but the next, like, he just seems really inconsistent. He just seems like maybe next week that won't be the same. Like, he seems super inconsistent, you know?
I mean, that's always been true of him, though. I always felt like he had his up weeks and his down weeks, and when he's on, he's like really, really good. And Shadowburn as well, I think, has played a super good May. So it seems like from a DPS perspective, from a damage dealing perspective, they're doing, from 1 week of competition, doing okay. I think they're probably, I mean, they did beat Houston, so that's something. They did take the Valiant to five maps. So they do, I think, even from those two results, we can say that this has been one of their better weeks of the season so far. It just depends on how well they're going to do, you know, obviously moving through everything else. They have Atlanta and NYXL, which I think is going to be probably pretty tough for them next week. They definitely don't have the easiest stage.
Yeah, it's going to be hard, especially with Atlanta on the upward too. I mean, if Atlanta ever go on an upward, I don't know what they're doing, but I think they will be. Yeah, they were two really, really hard games for them.
I mean, I also think that the Spark, just in general, are not super well suited to this meta. Like, we've seen Bezzy come back in right now, and he was put on a 2-way contract with their challenger team, or their challenger team. That's what it's called. Contenders team.
Yes.
I get all my amateur games mixed up. Contenders team. And so he was a player that I thought was going to really have a breakout season, obviously because of GOATs. That didn't really happen because it wasn't playing to his strengths. But Hangzhou, I think, they haven't played with him basically since stage 1, and they haven't played with him basically at all on hit scan. Mm-hmm. And for Hangzhou, sure, they've got this great Winston player, but Gushui really didn't play almost any Orisa at all before coming into this stage. And I guess No Smite is not an Orisa ace either. Otherwise, I assume that they would be playing him. So Hangzhou, I think, is a team that might take a little bit to figure themselves out and actually start to establish themselves in the new meta.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they definitely shouldn't try to kind of copy what other people are playing, especially if like it's kind of like the situation with the goats, right? Like if you can't play goats, don't play goats. You know?
Don't pull a Houston.
Yeah. Just play like something else. You know? Like try to find something that's like strong enough that's a part of your kind of like your specialists that you can kind of like beat the Eureka comp in some way, and like literally just make it so there's like really small changes in the composition, but in the big picture, everything just works out.
One thing I've noticed about Hangzhou as well is that they have a lot of difficulty switching compositions. Like they go into a match with a game plan and they're just going to do that. And they kind of try and overpower you through execution. So an example from last stage was when they would play a lot of like Winston Sombra comps into goats and they wouldn't run a Zarya. So you'd be like, well, how the fuck are they actually going to kill anybody with this? Like it works against triple DPS, but they were sort of forcing it to work anyway, just because of how good like Gushue is and how good their sort of backline dive was. And I never liked this composition. I thought it was, it's not ideal, but they were executing it well enough that it didn't matter. And they would sort of barely win games against good teams by using those kind of compositions. And so we talked earlier about how much reaction and comp switching is important in this current meta. And we saw all 30 heroes used in this last week. And I wonder if that's really going to slow Hangzhou down, because they really, especially when we look at the most recent result, which is when they lost the Valiant in playoffs. Valiant came in with a counter strat, and Hangzhou just sort of sat there and just kept slamming their head into a brick wall and not doing anything to actually change what they were playing against Valiant. So it does make me wonder. Like they don't even seem to adjust well at halftime and shit. So
right, it is actually like super important to always kind of like be on your toes and kind of swapping. But I'd really want to see like Godsby playing the Widowmaker and like Gushue on the Winston and Rhea on the Diva. Slayer, like their strongest heroes. I think they can definitely push through like certain comps, like the Eureka comp, and playing really aggressively and looking for variants and like kind of like pushing your limits on the heroes.
Because I feel like that team is like, I know obviously last stage they were doing very well, but for the whole season, they've been like the sleeper the whole time. Like it's aside from the very beginning, they were never ever doing badly. It's just that they were never like the best team. And obviously the names on paper don't leap out as the biggest names in the league. But you look at the position they're in now, if they do well this stage, they're absolutely primed for the playoffs. Are you a believer, Henry? Looks like you're a bit skeptical.
Yeah, I think they're probably going to drop off a little. I think it's just going to take them a little while to adjust, because kind of, I mean, I guess if you looked at it on a graph, they kind of they've gone up and then petered out a little bit. I think they're going to drop again, and then they will come back up maybe at the start of next season. I don't think they're going to adjust quick enough. And if they make it to, like when they get to like playoffs, there's Sigma coming to playoffs, and that's more for them to adjust to. And I do not see them being able to adjust to that as well as what they're currently having to deal with.
Do you think Sigma is going to be a hero that's going to be used significantly in the playoffs? Because he seems to. Okay, because he seems to me like
so much PTR, and totally, I think he's going to be used.
Are you seeing him more as a flex tank rather than a main tank?
I think it depends on the playstyle. To be honest, I think you can play him in two different. You can play him in a flex way, or you can play him in a main tank way. Obviously, I haven't seen him in scrims, but I've played a large amount of PTR, and I've played a lot of the 2-2-2 lock on that ranked, just to kind of feel out in general how it is looking. And yeah, you can play him right now. You can kind of play him in two different ways, and I think he could be used as like going for like a double shield kind of thing, or you could go for something a little bit more aggressive and just have like him as a main tank, and have like a Diva or a Zarya by his side. Like there's so many options I think with him, and you're going to see a lot of different compositions being thrown out.
I mean, I think his ultimate is fucking awesome. Like I love his kit. His kit seems really cool.
Super cool. I think he's a great hero. I actually think he's actually pretty balanced where he's at now with the new patch that they came out with, his E being buffed a wee bit.
Have you had a chance to play any of the PTR? I know pro players don't usually have a chance to like go on and try anything, Corey. Have you heard anything about Sigma? What do you think about the playoff upsetting implications of adding this guy so late in the game?
We don't really know how strong he is until like we see it in scrims and someone kind of comes up with like a new idea of how to play him in scrim. But I have played PTR. I have kind of like seen his abilities, played it quite a bit. His ult is awesome. I do agree. But my only issue with him is like he doesn't really have mobility. So it's kind of sad to see, like in a tank, especially. I guess you could run like Lucio or something with him, but he's not like Reinhardt who has like a huge shield that like you like bring up immediately. It's like something you can takes time.
I mean, it'd be pretty OP if he could just run all around the map while doing all that shit as well, wouldn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
There's not a way to make it fair.
It would, but like his downside is that he has immovability. Like,
sure.
I think he'd be kind of easy to bully from a DPS perspective. But I could see some ways of him kind of being really annoying to play against as well. His damage is pretty strong. He can kind of match flankers easily, like one-on-one. So I could see him being okay, but we won't know until obviously we see.
What do you think, Monty, about the fact that NYXL starts off the stage where, I know this is just going to be the case with their team forever, but we're all supposed to get hyped again. They're going to do it this time, guys. This time for real, and start with a loss immediately. But to be fair, to obviously one of the best teams.
I mean, yes. Again, this is the problem with talking about NYXL is like, you're like, oh man, they lost the Gladiators. It was pretty convincing. And then you remember they've only lost 3. This is only the 3rd time they've lost in the regular season. And their only other 2 losses are to Atlanta. So it's hard because when we look at NYXL, we're not saying that this team is likely to win the league at this point in time. But it's weird to consider their consistency in the regular season and then not consider them contenders, right? Because they're sitting there with the 2nd best record in the league, right? They're only, 2 games behind the Titans, like 22-1 to 19-3. So theoretically, we would say, wow, this team has a really good shot at winning the title. But it just doesn't feel that way from watching them. And especially watching them in 2-2-2 was pretty uninspired, I think, overall. Like, you'd think, well, they have the DPS players to do this. Obviously, Pine has probably been doing nothing but playing hit scan. Are we going to see more of him? Where's Flower in this mess? Libero has always been an excellent Hangzhou player. He was like the original Mei player back on Meta Athena, if you remember a lot of those strats that they were running. So you'd think that the problem with NYXL is you look at them, you're like, wow, they have all the pieces to do this.
There's no excuses not to.
So why aren't they doing it? And at this point in time, like if we look at their runs in the last couple of years of Overwatch League, it's one of those, I think, rare situations where you look at a very good team and you say, this team might need some coaching changes. Because for whatever reason, they crumple in high pressure situations and they're not able to translate their consistency into very deep playoff runs, especially this year, where last year, at least, they made every stage final. This year, they haven't even made one. And we're done with stage finals at this point in time, right? So it's very odd that a team that has only had 3 regular season losses has made 0 of the stage finals. I mean, to me, that says like they've got to get a psychological coach, performance coach, something like that going on. Maybe it's time just to blow up the whole coaching staff, because I think the players themselves are capable of producing a huge number of wins even without a competent coaching staff because of how skilled they are. So you might as well try and do something that's going to mix it up, because in my mind, at least right now, these results are disappointing and they're kind of unacceptable. Like you can't just keep going. You know, there's certain coaches that are really good at regular season, but they kind of get exposed in the playoffs. I remember a good example of this is the NFL coach John Fox, who was able to consistently produce great results in the regular season across teams. But when it came to the playoffs, his teams were shit. And sometimes it's just a mental thing going into those playoffs and having the right leadership in place so that you are able to actually fight through the high pressure situations. And considering how long this has been happening with NYXL, I don't know how you can say it's acceptable to continue it. It's really weird.
Like, they're the only team I can think of where you could even put them in the conversation that they should win, and yet every factor that goes against them has nothing to do with the roster. Like, no one's complaining about this roster. Even the players they added, like, they cut the only players you probably could cut and added, like, surefire great players to add. It's like, they have such an embarrassment of riches across the roster. It's like, I don't really know who else you blame. Has to be either the coaching staff or some of the players aren't as good as the name value says. What do you think, Henry? What's the problem with NYXL?
I mean, I think you guys are probably kind of hit on the head there. Like, they don't seem to know where to use their players to the most efficient way they can. There's definitely multiple places that I would put players in that I feel like they waste talent. They kind of just have this weird agenda of just trying to always play around Jonak too, which really tilts me. It's like, why? Like, you can still play around the other really proper good players that you have and still have Jonak playing well. Like, there's so many games where I feel like a lot lies on him. And do
you think that style just doesn't work anymore?
I think it can work on some days. I just don't think it can work consistently as they hope that it would work. And, you know, I know Pine comes into the conversation with some people. Like, I think he is now wasted talent. I don't think he is ever going to be able to come back on the stage unless he like improves drastically and is able to integrate him back into that team. Because
on this team at least, right? I mean, he could obviously go
on
to
this
some
team,
other lesser team.
yeah, totally. But like right now, like you would think on paper that, you know, Widow is really, really strong. Hangzhou is really, really strong. Jonak's Ana is still really, really good. Like, you would think that these guys would be popping off, but I don't think that they're playing to their players' like max mobility. I don't know I personally obviously don't know what's going on inside that team. I don't know what's the management doing, the coaches are doing, and what's being said. But yeah, it really is just they're not playing their players to the best of their abilities, and they're not playing the right players in the right places at the right time. They're still trying to like hold on to this weird old style of play that they've played for basically forever, and they don't really mix things up.
Corey, when since you have all these players from NYXL in your team now, like, do they have their own expectations of what a DPS should do? Have they ever told you any interesting stories about the NYXL days?
Not really. I think they're mostly kind of have the mindset of kind of adapting to the new team. When they first came, especially Ark was someone who was trying to quickly adapt to the team and kind of like help the people out who are struggling, basically, because like he has like all the knowledge,
sure,
like from NYXL. But for the most part, like I was playing with Yanis since the beginning, so we just kind of meshed as a teammate.
Okay, what were you going to say anyway? Sorry, you were going to jump in with the point on the NYXL.
Yeah. I was gonna say, it might be like still a nerves thing for them. You play so many matches on the stage, and I kind of have this as well. Like, it kind of feels like home. Like, you're playing just like at home. Whenever you go on the stage, you play so many games, and when it's that time for the playoff match, it just feels probably different for them. And not being able to kind of adjust like in the game like that immediately.
If that was like the legitimate reason, though, I'd laugh super hard. If New York was still unable to adjust to a playoff setting, the players, like the veteran players they have, I'd just be like, "Are you serious?" Jeez.
Sad thing is, though, that is a real thing. Like,
I understand. Yeah,
I even think in sports, you see, there's loads of famous examples of the people where for whatever reason, and the big problem is, people who are gamers and don't have much history with either esports or sports generally always just say, like, yeah, just get a sports psychologist or whatever. And I always tell people, like, do you think that, like, like Andy Murray never heard of that before? Like, the concept of a sports psychologist, like, it's not like an instant fix, like that. Basically, you're telling a guy, can you please fix my brain so that it works better under specific circumstances? Like, well, that's no problem. I'll just open it up here. What's this loose diode? Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's the toughest task in the world. It's hard enough to coach people, never mind fixing people's brains or helping them fix their own brain. So, like, I agree, it's definitely something you should look into, but I have to also say, after seeing this happen, not only with this exact core, even when they've added players and took them out, but also from seeing cores across a lot of different games, I have to say, it's wild how many times, like, once this settles in, it just becomes a thing. Like, it starts off as a narrative of like, they lost a couple of times, who cares? Eventually, the players themselves is in their heads, whether it was at the beginning or not. And the problem I have to say is when you get those sorts of squads, either you literally hit a miracle and tomorrow they just fix it and they never lose again and they're the best team, or you'd usually have to blow the entire thing up. Like, not even just take one player. You have to literally just crack the entire court and start over again and hope that whoever you pick, I don't know who it would be in this case, that they're just not the ones that had that problem. Because the weird thing about it is, I do think it's almost like a group mind thing, because I've noticed you can have teams that have this problem and then two of them leave and go to one team and that team's successful, and two of them stay and that team's successful, and you think, well, combined, surely who was the problem? But it's like a whole group thing for whatever reason.
Well, do you see any parallels to this in like the old Astralis roster before they, like when they were on TSM and when they had so much potential, but it felt like they would just crumble whenever they were close to realizing it?
Well, the other thing is, Monty, it's even the team that's now currently the top in CSGO had the same problem. Team Liquid last year was second place in all the big finals. They lost all of them to Astralis. This year, they won nearly every final they've been in. So in both cases, it's usually like a mixture of maybe one player comes in who adds something like in the actual game. And then I don't know if what they add somehow, I don't know, makes you more comfortable or makes you think that you're better. But then it clearly is like you almost have to swap the mindset of everyone in the team. Because the weird thing is, it's like I always say, this is the weird thing about games in general, is how like teams take on a character that isn't always explicitly the players within the team. Like you can have a team that's super clutch, but then you take those players out in other teams and maybe they aren't. Maybe that was a knock-on effect as well, you know. Because I always feel personally, like whenever you're in this kind of scenario, you're a big favourite, you're not an underdog, you're the big favourite, you've got a playoff scenario. Crucially for me is if you already would have beaten that team in the regular season, so clearly you actually have the ability to beat them. If you then lose to those teams routinely or every time it's a big chance, I think part of that's almost like, it's probably like one or two people have problems and then it affects the entire squad. Because then it's almost like you start looking at the guy next to you thinking he's going to make the play, or you're playing more defensively because you can't trust this other teammate in a way that you would in a regular season game. Half the problem with this is, though, you can't replicate those scenarios as far as I can tell in practice. Like, it's very tough to create anything comparable.
And I think it's hard to make even the decision in order to say, okay, we're going to make a shift here for the NYXL, because again, how do you justify that when they've only lost 3 games in the regular season?
Sure.
They've made the playoffs every time. They are effectively, because of the way our system works, because they are number 1 at the Atlantic, and basically London can't catch them at this point in time, they're guaranteed the number 2 seed in the playoffs.
So it'd be very easy to lie to yourself and say, no problem,
exactly.
right? Yeah, whatever. That was last season. Who cares about that? Stage playoffs, they don't even count. Listen, last year, we did really well in all the stage playoffs. This year, we're just going for number 1. You know, we're not letting all that stuff worry you. You could easily do that sort of a thing, you know.
Well, I think it's hard because you could be even worse by making a lot of these changes, right? That's
sure.
a real risk that you run is like, well, we've got this thing right now that's put us in the top 2 records in this league. And even if we continue to do poorly in the playoffs, from a fan perspective, how much do you like? It sucks, but your fans are still engaged because you're playing well. So even if you're not winning the championship, you're always in contention, right? So your fans are there. They're going to keep cheering for the team, even though it is like a bit of I mean, we talked about the razor cake phenomenon with NYXL before. And so I think from a management perspective, it's such like an insanely tough call to make, whether you're going to try and upset the status quo because that might mean a championship run, if at the same time it means you might not be that best team in your Atlantic division and get that automatic top 2 seed anymore. I don't know. I think it's really, really difficult.
Yeah. I agree on that point, though. Like, that's actually part of the issue as well. It's not as simple as saying, well, you know, we're working on things, so just put that on the list. It's like to actually change some of those fundamental things, probably in the short term would make you worse, I would imagine. You know, someone's going to be less comfortable if they have to swap over how they play a position, or something that you were doing that was working before, you're actually going to literally change to try and get better. That's a tough sell as well.
Yeah, it really just depends, I think, as well. Like, whatever the upper management's goals are, right? Like, you could come into it and say, hey, we don't really care if you make playoffs or not every time. As long as you're in like the top region, we have a lot of fans and we make a crap load of money from merchandise sales and just the fact that we are like one of the coolest teams in the league, then they probably don't mind, right? Like, why would you make that adjustment? Like, I understand that, you know, there is a playoffs at the end of the league and it is nice to make that big chunk of money, and it is nice to win that. But, you know, if you're looking at it from a management perspective, why would you shuffle it up and risk possibly going from being one of the best teams when it comes across the whole league and the whole season to possibly being one of the worst? Because you could shuffle it up and something could go horrendously wrong.
Sure. I'll even throw in one other element, which is even though a Westerner would say that, like, we'll just get a sports psychologist, everyone's doing it. I'm very interested to know if someone like NYXL has even considered that, because I can tell you that's actually one thing that a lot of Westerners don't know about Korean esports, is that in Korean esports, that is still the uncharted territory. Like, by default, they don't bring in sports psychologists. They don't do that. In fact, that's why when they have these teams and players, because the concept of being someone who always finished second no matter how good you are goes literally right the way back in Korean esports. They used to call them Kongs in StarCraft, and basically, those people typically never really get over the issue. Like, they don't really see it as something that can be fixed. I even imagine they probably just think they're unlucky or something bizarre like that, or just, they're cursed in some way, because I know for some reason when I've asked the people who I know in coaching system in Korea, they basically said it's because within their culture, there's like a really negative stigma around any kind of mental health issue, and people as a result don't want to like admit that that could be a problem. So even in this case, you're not literally telling the person you're mentally ill. You're just saying you've got some sort of a performance anxiety hang up, or, in these moments you're having a problem. If it's socially stigmatized as a really bad thing, people are that's going to be the last possible resort before you're going to do that. So I'd actually be very interested to know if teams like Seoul, NYXL, if they even consider that sort of thing.
Well, it's also that, speaking very broadly, in Korea, like sort of psychologists and mental health is still sort of stigmatized, not something that you really discuss or seek help for. I'm not sure if that extends to sports psychology as well, but in general, that is kind of true of Korean culture.
I want to say like it is definitely into your head. Like, getting into your own head will definitely stop you from pushing for that like number one spot. I think it also kind of comes in some way too of like when you're playing the game and you look at your opponent, and if you see them as like monstrous, or if you see like you're right there, you're almost there, and you kind of get into your own head about it, then in most cases you will play way less to like what you usually play to. Especially against like thinking, if you think your opponent's like a monster, then you're going to be like playing scared, or not to what you usually do, just some big ego.
So for you guys, I mean, obviously, it's been somewhat of a rough season for you, even though you have been improving, it seems, over time. And like, obviously, important win for you guys this week. It seems unlikely that you're going to be doing as badly in this meta. One thing I've noticed about you guys on stage is it seems like you're always like joking and laughing. I imagine, I hate to say it, but you did kind of get used to losing, I imagine. And do you feel like now it's easier to sort of take those losses in stride, or to keep good spirits up? Because your team always seems to be having a good time up there.
So, yeah, I hate to say it, but like after you lose so much, you kind of become a little numb to it. And at first, like in the first stage, you're like it feels really bad because like you're a new team, you want to start off with a winning record, and things aren't working out to what you want it to be. But like we have lost like way harder in the past. So usually when we like play well as a team, and it does become like really close of a game, you don't like leave it like oh man, like this sucks. But you look at it as like we played like really well. A little couple fixes would actually push us into a win, and that's something that we've looked at. And actually, throughout almost all the stages, there have been games where it's been like that. And basically, like we enjoy playing with each other as a team, and specifically like Stratus, I enjoy playing. And now he sits right next to me too, so I get to go to kind of like goof around with him a little bit on stage. But we don't really look at it in a pessimistic way. We are always optimistic going forward, and I think this meta is something that's going to be really strong for us, and there'll be a lot of good performances coming out of us.
Well, it's also your org has been pretty good about continuing to go out there and get players, like adding players like Arc and Sleepy have been, I think, successful for you guys. And we haven't talked about, currently they're getting visas, right? So we're not going to see Losish and Elevote anytime. Well, are we going to see them somewhat soon? Or what was how are you feeling about these new roster additions?
Ellie and Lil are actually like really good. It's also an added bonus that speaking. And they do add to the team environment, especially with like the coordination, communication, lots of small things like asking for specific help in certain areas. And I'm not really sure about the visa thing. They are in Europe still, and they are getting their visas, but I don't know the date and time that we'll. It's a possibility that it could be like a 2020 thing, but just having them on the roster, I think, is like reassuring.
What is it like having Wizard Hyung as a coach?
He's like actually really smart, in my opinion. He spends a lot of time at the game, really looks deep into it, like analysis.
He better fucking hard. I hope even if he doesn't have anything to do, he's just in that room with the like do not disturb sign on the outside. Just watch fucking anime in there or something. When you've got a contract like that, you better look like you're doing 80 hours a week no matter what you're doing.
He does work really hard, actually. Like he spends a ton of time into things. I think once we like kind of like as a team, and it's kind of hard to like sad to say, but like we never really. It was really hard for us to mesh together. For some reason, like we never like clicked immediately, and it's always been like a rough patch. But definitely recently, I would say the new meta feels fresh. We're all really motivated to keep continuing and hopefully pushing to the stage to its limits and getting like hopefully like a 5-2, 6-1, 7-0 would be really nice in our end since we have a pretty easy schedule, in my opinion. And once we kind of polish our like teamwork as a team, we'll definitely look more into analysis, and that's when Wizard will come in and kind of give the deep insight of like what we should be doing and different ways like take the game.
So I want to talk about some stuff that is in your past, and just because I'm not sure how much you're going to want to talk about this, but I do think that it's probably far enough out now that it becomes a very interesting topic. Before the season, so you guys were actually one of the teams that started scrimming the earliest in the off season last year after your formation, and you guys were not doing like normal bad. You guys were doing like super extra bad in those scrims, and there was a lot of talk around the scene once all the other teams got scrimming again about how disastrously badly the Washington Justice were doing in scrims, and scrims are one thing. Then you started out the season and it looked really bad. I know a lot of teams didn't want to scrim with you, at least in the off season. And I imagine it's been like a really fucking hard time for you guys, especially when, in order to improve, you weren't even able to play against teams that would help you improve, really. So do you feel comfortable talking about like how it was going through that entire process? Because it seems like it's gotten a lot better now, which is why I'm bringing it up. Like I wasn't about to go and like talk about this and kick you guys while you were down, but I think it is now super interesting to reflect upon.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like we got like exiled from all like L scrims and stuff. We still had like people we'd play against. There's some good teams that still play. And I like in our defense, like there are scrims where we do like perform well as a team. I think our kind of like our issue back in like stage 1, 2, like even 3.
Well, I'm mostly talking before the season started.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because like back when you guys first started, it was pretty ugly.
Yeah. Like we were playing like players in Korea were waking up like 5 a.m. to play, and they had like 200 ping playing on like the Western like NA server, and then we didn't really like know how to like mesh as a team. We didn't click immediately. Our players weren't really picked up to kind of play in the goats meta, so we were still kind of learning it. All the tryouts were basically like revolved around the DPS, and it's something why we'll probably perform much better in this stage as well. But I don't really think it was like super bad. Like we definitely weren't exiled.
I'm actually impressed that you say that some of the top teams would still scrim you. I don't know if that's due to Wizard Hyung's connections or whatever, because I can tell you, in Korean esports, they are infamously ruthless. Like, as soon as that, like, even if you were like the 5th best team and if they think you aren't good enough, they will just play you a couple of times. They'll be like, this team's shit, exile them forever. And the only way you get back in is when you like beat them directly, and then they're like, allow them back into the group now. It's like, they're ridiculously gangster over there, mate.
It's nice.
It also like that attitude was so prevalent in League of Legends because all the teams before the World Championship would go to Korea to scrim, and it's like the only way. Basically, like there was a time period when when teams had multiple rosters, including like practice squads that weren't on the main roster at all. And so like famously, like a lot of the top teams would like trot out their B team to play against you, and then if you did okay versus them, then they'd like give you like one.
It was like the
block.
dojo system from Kung Fu movies. You have to fight like the lesser boss before you get to fight the actual boss.
But they literally like wouldn't even practice with you because like they didn't want to make you better accidentally. And them not get anything out of it. So yeah, it was like the mini boss followed by the real boss. And it was like you had one shot at the real boss, and if you fucked it up, then the boss was you could never fight the boss again. Like they just wouldn't play. So yeah, it was like a really weird. It was very difficult to get quality scrims against the best Korean teams, but that's also one of the ways that they kept their competitive advantage.
Sure.
Because they wouldn't teach you, like it basically wouldn't allow you the opportunity to like learn from them in scrims.
The best one ever, and I'll just tell this for the sake of the anecdote very quickly, because it's not even relevant to League of Legends now, but back in the day in League of Legends, they used to have sister teams that were actually allowed. Like you could have two teams under the same org competing in the same tournament because, well, it's Asian esports, so they didn't understand like I think the term didn't translate like conflict of interest. Just if you put that in Google Translate, it just says cannot find a reference. So anyway, like there was this team, and this is the best one ever because it's so like this sounds like something that can't even be real. It sounds like something out of a movie. Where if someone wrote this into the movie, I'd be like, "You're a fucking hack, mate." But there was these two teams that were the best teams in Korea in 2012. Right? They were Azubu Frost and Azubu Blaze because they had cool themes like that, like a fucking Power Rangers gang or something. So anyway, this is how next level Koreans go to have like simultaneously they want to improve, but they don't want you to even get slightly better, which is the most fucked up practice mentality I've ever heard. So what they would do, right, is if you were a Western team, they would only let you scrim against Blaze, which was seen as the second best team in their org. And then what they would do is the Blaze team would go to the Frost team and tell them everything that you do and how you play the game. And then if they play you in an official match, you've never played the Frost team, but they've basically played like a download of you that was their sister team pretending to be you, all just so that you couldn't maybe get any sort of a grip on the fucking game. Like, it's outrageous. Like, sadly, that one's real, even though that sounds like some bad plot to a movie if someone made an esports movie. You know, like, that's like the rich kids gang, you know, and his dad pays for two teams so that they don't have to ever improve. So that's outrageous, isn't it? What were you going to say, Henry? You were implying something about, like, the current scene, right?
Oh, I was just going to say sometimes, I mean, this is obviously definitely a Western thing to do, but it's really, really nice for, like, you know, you might come out of a scrim that you didn't do too great in, and then you get to scrim Washington and you get to smoke a team for 2 hours.
There we go. There we go. Right. So that explains more. Yes.
Thing. Like, that is a thing, you know, yeah. Like, I mean, sorry to fire at you, Corey, but like that is a thing. Like you will book in a scrim with a team that you know are dog shit, and you will be like, "This is going to be a scrim where
it's a feel good scrim."
They can just practice them. Like, it's a feel good scrim. They can maybe just practice the mechanics. We can try some silly stuff, you know. We can try some weird combos. Yeah, it is. Like, it's good to have those.
Yeah. Basically, the rebound scrim. It's just like, I need to feel real good about myself. Listen.
So when it comes to scrims these days, I'm curious because you mentioned that now one of the advantages that you have is like Florida. So the teams have been going up in players, down in players in terms of like having full 12-man rosters. It seems kind of weird to me to have like an 11-man roster. Like if you're going to do that, you might as well have like an entire secondary team so that you can do internal scrims. Now that Guangzhou Charge, you know, you've made this decision. You said, oh, well, we can have both teams scrimming. Are you scrimming against each other? Is the like B team, do you like send them out to scrim against other Overwatch League teams or contenders teams, or like what's your plan for that?
All of those things, like scrimming internally, practicing set plays, stuff like that. Also just scrimming together to practice stuff that we might not want to show off in scrims, and then the other team goes off in scrims like either our teams or even contenders teams if we can't find a scrim.
So is this because it's always been, I guess, in Overwatch League, like you'd think that this would be like the best way to run a team. Just go 12 players, you know, have backups at every position. It's more feasible now in 2-2-2, right? Like it's a lot easier to run 2 because there's like a direct 1-to-1 correlation between players.
Yeah.
So that you, like you were saying earlier, you constantly have pressure on the starting players, and that you have more, I guess, more direct flexibility between swapping people in and out because they all ostensibly should be playing the same hero pools. Do you think that, but previously it also failed, at least like when we looked at London when it started, because they tried the 12-player roster, and then people had egos and wanted to leave the team and like wanted to go to get starter positions. And do you think what do you think the wave of the future is? Because it seems like in a perfect world, you would run the 12-player roster, but oftentimes it's not actually practical with people's personalities.
I think as we get more teams, like actual more franchise spots, and the talent gets like dispersed out more, so you obviously have your super good players that will have like their massive egos, and then you just have your like average players. I think the 12-man roster is always going to be the way to go, like because you're not going to have those conflicts. You're not going to have those like, oh, I shouldn't be on the second team, I should be on a starting team, because they will be on a starting team. They won't be like, you won't just have them sitting there on the bench because there's other teams available for them to play in. I just think now as well with 222, the 12-man roster is it's so easy to run. Like way back, it wasn't as easy to run because it's like, hey, we have these 12 players, but we don't have 6 guys that can run exactly goats. Like we have a guy on the bench that's absolutely insane at Hangzhou, Doom, and I don't know, Torbjorn, right? We have these 3 crazy heroes that he can play, but he has no idea how to play goats. But now, because we're in a 2-2-2 meta, we can maybe even have like the other B team play a completely different style of 2-2-2. But because we have 2 damage, 2 tanks, and 2 supports, like that's, we can do that. We're not forced into some weird goats or some weird like 3-3 or something like that.
Do you ever see a situation where you would use your entire B team to run like a special strat that they've practiced on like one map? Is that a way that you might consider using them?
I think any team can do that. Like you saw Seoul do that last stage. They were messing around. One day they would play one roster, and then the next day they pulled out a different one. I mean,
I'm not going to pretend that made sense, but okay.
It was like, it was goats, but still it was like a different variation, and they played it in a different style. Like there is certain cases where that is going to happen, and obviously I'm not going to sit here and tell you everything that we would want to do with like a 12-man roster, but like it is 100% something that we can do, and any other team that goes for 12, like if they have 12 players, can build to do.
Is that something that you think would be helpful to you, Corey, as part of the Justice? Is this like something you would welcome on your roster as well?
I mean, I would definitely welcome it, but I think like there are some flaws to having the 12. Like you said, there might be like players who are on the B team and might feel a little like ego. There's also Arc in the back. Looking at us weird, but
because right now you guys have 11 players now that you've signed the 2 latest ones, which to me is like the most awkward number of players to have.
It is, but we kind of just like sub people in and out, kind of see who fits where, and eventually kind of get your like strongest roster that you'll like tend to play more. But for me, I think like there are like some downsides to having the 12. Like say you had the 12 and you only scrimmed your B team. They'll have like one single like play style. There is value to like scrimming other teams and seeing like how they play, and kind of like seeing how like right now at least seeing how the meta kind of adapts and how do they deal with certain things. Also, there is some value to kind of like you can kind of like assume how like other teams are playing as well based off of like certain teams, and like teams kind of like will take things as soon as like they see them. They're like, oh, that's good. Like I'll take it. I'll try it. And you kind of like assume what other teams are doing as well, and that's how like they'll probably play the composition. And you can kind of play around it. But overall, I think the 12-man roster isn't a bad thing for sure, but definitely something to think about.
I mean, what it would take would be another DPS player to be added to your roster. So you're sort of just one DPS player short of having that full 12 players.
Yeah, I'd be like a hit scan player, I believe.
So you're the only one who's not in competition right now because it's Otto and Stratus.
Yeah, pretty much. No one can like, no one's rivaling like my Widow or anything currently.
That's true. I mean, your Widow actually, statistically, you have one of the best Widows in the league. It's been quite fun to watch. So it's definitely one of the bright spots for the Justice right now.
Is anyone here a believer in the Houston Outlaws? Speaking out of ever all your pieces, does anyone actually think they're going to be really good?
I mean, what's weird is they lost to Paris, but then they beat Gladiators. I don't really know how to read into that.
Just Houston things.
Outlaw
right?
logic. Just outlaw things.
It's just awkward at the beginning for sure. But Outlaws definitely has the potential to be super strong.
I mean, now they don't even have to argue about whether they should play DPS or not. You don't have a choice. It has to be two of them in the game at all times.
I mean, it's been interesting to watch the Outlaws this season because I feel like, Jake actually he's been sort of ramping up as the season goes on, and Jake has always been like a very weirdly inconsistent player, not so much based on his performance it's mostly been about whether he can play heroes that he's good at or not. And like when he hasn't been playing heroes that he's been particularly strong on, he's struggled. But it's interesting to me because, like, honestly, he's doing things this year that he was never able to do last year, like play a decent tracer. Now he's on McCree, and like, is his McCree going to be the best in the league? No, but it's serviceable enough, and I feel like he has his hero pool is currently the broadest that it's ever been, and it feels like he's starting to pick up a lot of heroes that he just was not able to play at all before, and play them to an acceptable standard to work in some of their strategies. So it's been fun to watch.
Yeah, Jake has definitely been like really performing, like in my eyes, and something I've seen from him that's like really kind of annoying from my point of view. But like his Hanzo has been really, really, really good recently, and it's especially like annoying for like a flanker or whatnot when Hanzo's kind of just hitting everything, and he's like on this hot streak currently, and I hope to see more of it. And I personally want Outlaws to win because I know I like Outlaws, but Jake's actually been pretty nasty with it recently.
Okay. Well, you think this would be a great meta for Muma as well if we are going to see a lot more Wrecking Ball with the Diva. They have a chance. I mean, they've been playing Cool Matt again. Cool Matt, obviously a Diva specialist, so it feels like depending on who they have in at Flex Tank, they're able to run some different compositions, whether it's Spree or Cool Matt. Cool Matt's also historically been a good Hog player. So like you'd think that Muma on Orisa been good, Wrecking Ball been good. So they've got the tools now to sort of run with this. I think it can be difficult to see exactly like who they should run at DPS because they do have a lot of skilled DPS players. And it was interesting because Clockwork tweeted out and we saw Dante tweet this out as well, that Classic Houston Outlaws, they always struggled, by the way, with writing 6 names on a piece of paper for whatever reason. Like they've accidentally put wrong players in so many times. It's literally like a fucking box. Here, I'll draw it for you. I did this on the analyst desk earlier this year. It's literally a sheet of paper, by the way, and it looks like this. Okay? It's literally the roster submission page, which we were not allowed to put on Watchpoint. I couldn't show an actual roster submission page because League Ops was, I don't know, confidential documents, but it looks like this. It's a box. Oh, you can't fucking see it. Great. Okay.
We can see it. We can see it. Yeah.
So it's literally just like a paper.
You just write each name in
boxes. And all you have to do is write 6 players, 1 name in each box. And somehow, so before the match, when you have to submit rosters, so Houston has fucked it up in the past where their starting roster has been wrong. And like Raucus is supposed to be been playing in certain matches. And then Dante tweeted out this week that they fucked up so you fill out that same form and you hand it to like the ref, right? And they come into your room. So we have these like dugouts, right? And they'll like knock on the door and be like, towards the end of a map, right, Corey? They'll come in and they'll be like, do you want to change any of your rosters? Yeah. This is still how it works. It hasn't changed fundamentally since.
I believe so, yeah.
So the coaches then give the roster submission form and they swap out whoever they need to swap out. And so apparently the Outlaws managed to fuck this up and like keep Dante in. And then they realized, apparently Clockwork said to me that they on Twitter, that they realized that Dante's like Sombra was doing a really good job of shutting down the DPS on Gladiator. So after they accidentally put him in for the next map, then they just left him in.
Get me out.
Like, this is good, man.
I mean,
as the Outlaws operating on some cartoon logic where you get hit in the head and that makes you like really smart for like 10 minutes and then someone hits you in the head again. And you're like, oh, I forgot everything again. Like, fucking hell.
I just love how the Outlaws in 2 years of writing 6 names in boxes have not.
And remember, they've barely changed the lineup. They've got like the same players from the beginning pretty much.
It's probably because they tried to put through for some sort of transfer and they just were like, so we'd like to buy this player, and they just couldn't write their name into an email.
Yeah, so here was Dante's tweet. Funny story. I was only supposed to play Koth, so King of the Hill, Control, but we messed up the subs and I ended up playing Hanamura. Then we realized Sombra is broken and I ended up playing Havana too. LOL, GG's Gladiators. Like this. Like, I don't understand how this one team, like, to be fair, other teams have also fucked up the roster submission, which has been funny, but no team has done it as many times as the Outlaws.
The only thing is, though, sadly, since it's the Outlaws, I could believe this is true. If it wasn't, that would be the most god-tier trash talk ever to the Gladiators, obviously, wouldn't it? If you just lied and pretended like, oh, I don't even normally play that map. It's like, but sadly, I believe this is probably true. It seems like it's plausible. Right, Henry, you don't seem like people in the community hate you enough. What do you think about the Outlaws?
I think about the Outlaws. I really don't really have much of an opinion on other teams. I can't concentrate on our own.
Okay.
I know that's like the easy route to take, but I don't really get too involved. I mean, I look at other teams a lot. I do a lot of scouting, and obviously we played them last stage, so I did look at them a lot too. But they were one of the teams that I didn't look at as much. So I try and delegate my time. And when I knew that we had Houston in the week, I was like, I'll just do half the work. But yeah, I mean, this stage in general with the 2-2-2 look, I think it can be okay for them. I think they can actually run away with some free points because of the things they can play, and then they might be able to mess with people because there is no meta just yet. So they might be able to abuse the fact that they have players that can excel mechanically on certain heroes, and they can just kind of run away with games because Jake pops off on Hangzhou. They could do stuff like that because they don't need to be coordinated just like right now because no one else is.
They also have a lot of winnable games. Like, if we talk about their schedule, next week it's Atlanta, Philadelphia. Week after that it's London, Justice, and then the week after that is Chengdu Hunters. So, like, it's possible that they go like 4-3, maybe if they're lucky 5-2.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think they could have a good stage, and just like I said, like with the fact the meta hasn't evolved, they can run away with the fact that their mechanics can beat out teams. Just let's hope that they don't become so uncoordinated like they have in the past that the mechanics doesn't even matter because they get farmed by the teams that kind of caught up.
The only thing is, though, even though you didn't say anything mean or critical there particularly, that could all still be spun to be the same way. Like, you just go with the angle of like, I don't watch them unless I actually have to. Waste of my time, says outspoken British charge coach. That'll be the headline in the Daily Mail.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it is. I'm not really going to... I'll learn a little bit from Houston, but I'd rather watch another team. I'd rather watch another team if I'm going to learn something from a team.
There we go.
I guess the problem with Houston is that they dug themselves into such like an epic hole by going 0-7 that they're currently outside of the play-ins, and they're outside of the play-ins by a pretty meaningful margin right now. Because they're 9-14, which means they're going to have to go 5-0 just to get to 50%.
This Paris loss was a big deal. That was when you needed. Deal. That was a gimme in theory.
Well, they also randomly beat Gladiator, so we wouldn't have expected them to.
I guess it evens out in that sense, sure.
But I think Outlaws are in a lot of trouble, especially because their map differential is so bad. They're at -14 right now. So, even if you get back up, somehow you climb back up, you might still be in the negative map differential. So a lot of teams are going to be looking at that kind of stuff and, trying to make those improvements as time goes on. And with how competitive the play-in stages are looking like that right now, especially because other teams that are currently under 50% are teams like Guangzhou, which has been looking a lot better. We look at the Atlanta Reign that has a very good map differential in spite of all their losses because they were crushing teams below them, and then they were losing just like barely to top teams. So their record does not show really how good that team has been playing, and especially when they're coming off a strong win in this past week, right? Like, people didn't necessarily expect them to beat the Spark so conclusively. So there's a lot of competition for those play-in spots, and Valiant too is the one. Valiant's the big team that's on the outside looking in. They're currently not in the play-ins, but they are definitely going to be a threat for that play-in position given their current strength. And
they also have at the very end of the stage, they play a couple of really hard teams, but before that, they have a lot of like winnable matches in theory if you're going to be a decent playoff team. I thought the last team we could talk about then to round out the episode is the team that used to be the best, the Vancouver Titans, because this is a squad where not only were they so strong in GOATs, I think people wanted to see stylistically how would they come out in the role lock, but even I would say that was probably the main criticism people put at the feet of Bumper, is they used to say like, will this guy even be good in a different version of GOATs? What if it switches up completely? Because like the implication was, like he doesn't play that style because he's some genius next level guy. Forget it's like no, like that is his style, and you play around him. It's like that way around. And so, what do you think, Henry? Vancouver Titans, should they still be? Can they be the best in the role lock? What do you think of them?
I don't think they're the best, but they're still going to be within the top bracket, the top tier. I think. It's not like their tank line that's now going to excel. It's going to be their DPS that are now going to excel. I think from watching the games and watching Titans, they've definitely put the reins on Bumper, especially just you stick them on Orisa, right? And they just say, yo, press right click now and again and tell me when you're going to halt, keep your shield down and just play a passive game. And then like Coxall do his thing. And I think they're going to do great. I don't think they will be like tippity top. I don't think they can win the stage playoffs. And I think that if we push into the whole season playoffs, I don't think they're going to win the Overwatch League, but I do think they're going to stay within the top bracket. And, they have the DPS players to kind of keep them there.
They're definitely beatable for sure. Like, kind of like watching their play. Like, it's DPS meta. Some nasty DPS player who's having a great game can actually just destroy. So, I even think like bottom teams who have just an insane DPS player can upset like almost any team currently, especially like how the meta's been. I also think like not even just Vancouver Titans, but I think Shanghai is also kind of in a similar boat. Their DPS kind of like excelled against playing against goats, and now that's 2-2 lock. That it's a little different now, and there's gonna be a lot more star players coming up and kind of like showing up against these like in quotes best DPS players currently.
Do you think that the types of players like you're saying who were the DPS players but in the end of the GOATS meta, will they get a little bit exposed?
Yeah, I think they will be. I think like DM gets a lot of like
he's got magic around him, yeah.
Yeah, he has a lot of love currently, but I mean like Happy kind of gave him the hands in Atlanta. So like there are DPS players out there who are really, really strong currently that just haven't really like shown it yet or have played against.
So what you're saying is DM's had his day. It's time to move on. Exactly. Oh god. Whatever. I have to get one in every episode, don't I?
Yeah, I got to spin it.
I think it's interesting that Hureg is the one who's coming out instead of Stitch, because Stitch was the one who was often coming in and playing that like hit scan role, even in the GOATS metas when they needed him. And now it's switched over to Hureg. And Hureg's just such an interesting player to me because he's one of the pinnacle players of like all aim, no brain, where it's like his mechanics are crazy, but he just does shit sometimes that doesn't make any sense. And it's like, what could he possibly have been thinking in order to do that? Like, for example, last year on London, there were times where he played McCree and he'd like kill somebody with this fantastic shot, and then he would immediately like roll into their entire team and just kill himself. And I was like, why would you do that? You literally didn't have to do that. So I think he's been playing really well, though, at the start of this stage. And I'm wondering, just because he's been on so many benches for so long, how much he's actually improved.
Bench to bench, the Hureg story.
It is a London bench, runaway bench to Vancouver Titans bench.
Some would say he's still benched now because he's not actually playing the games finally.
I
agree, though. Yeah. Come on. Yeah, come on.
I was gonna say like seeing him come out like on the Widow and the McCree, like. I watched his POV because I was curious, and he was hitting like lots of shots, and his aim, like raw mechanic skill, is like really good. But I think the reason for Hureg over Stitch is that like Stitch is probably more prominent on the Tracer, and currently Tracer really isn't played too much in this meta, and you most likely will see like a McCree or Widow or some weird hit scan hero.
I mean, I do think we have to talk about London as well, because we sort of talked about the disappointment of Philadelphia, and if anything. We've talked a lot about this on the broadcast, and we're not saying that it is, the meta is completely the same as last year, because that's obviously not true with the role lock. There's different people playing Roadhog. There's more factors to consider. We have new heroes that we didn't have last year in the playoffs. But it is, at some level, there is a significant similarity between the playoff meta of last year and the one that we are currently engaged in right now. And Philadelphia and London, you think, would have been the big winners of that. Philadelphia lost, unfortunately for them, a couple of close matches in Game 5. But London came out and they didn't have the strongest opponents. I think
They have a pretty weak stage in general.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the Atlantic Division life is weak stage in general. But, Fuel and the Defiant are not the top teams in the league, obviously. Dallas, I think, actually has some like crazy statistic where they haven't won a game since when was their last win? Because they went 1-6. They went 1-6.
Yeah.
In the last stage, which was obviously super disappointing. And who did they beat in that stage? They got close to beating New York, but didn't. They lost twice to Chengdu. Oh, they beat the Justice. Sorry. So they beat the Justice in week 1 of stage 3.
And it was all downhill from there.
Week 1 in stage 3. And they haven't won a game since week 1 in stage 3. And they haven't beat...
Are they playing Washington anytime soon?
They won their matches. They won their matches in week 5 against Florida. And then the last team that was even they beat the Valiant and the Houston Outlaws in Dallas in week 4 of stage 2. But that was in April. And then since April, the only teams they've beaten have been the Justice and the Mayhem.
I think what to me really was the exclamation point at the end of the sentence for the Dallas Fuel was when they fined Taimu for saying publicly that he wanted to play in the team. Even though I'll admit I have definitely purposely phrased it that way, there was a little bit more nuance to it than that. That is still the facts of what they did. That's the level that team is at now. It's I really wish I could just play for you. That attitude's unacceptable. You're fined. I don't ever want to hear that kind of talk ever again.
I mean, I think Taimu has really good game knowledge, and he's a shot caller, and he may be what this team needs. I'd love to see more Taimu. I think his performance has been good when he's been in. But, outside of Control, which London lost pretty convincingly to both Dallas and to Toronto, so I'm not sure where their control issues are. Juster's ball isn't very good. That's probably not helping them. But when we've seen them just dominate on every non-control map, and this is what we expected, it goes back to the synergy that Prophet's been playing nuts on Hangzhou. He even started playing Widowmaker this week, which I've never really seen before. So it just keeps showing what a crazy versatile player Prophet is. And it's the synergy as well. You look at the halt Dragon Strike combos that they've been able to execute. And those are skills that they used a year ago to win the finals, because it was actually, as of yesterday, exactly 1 year since London won the finals. And it seems like they just picked up right where they left off, really, and it's fun to see. London is, again, a team that might be warming up for a very serious playoff run.
Well, luckily, the next game is against this team called Charge. So, Henry, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would say they're a scary team. I mean, I've been doing a lot of research on them over the past few days and the past week or so, because I just know how scary they are. And yeah, I mean, it's someone for a lot of teams to be careful of right now. I don't think Birdring has hit his stride just yet. I think per previous games, Prophet has popped off seriously bad. It's crazy how much he did in the past 2 games. And then Fury too. He is basically back on the diva doing the crazy things that he usually does. He was eating May ults out of the sky, and he was doing the things that he always does with Matrix. So yeah, that team in general right now are a team that I would warn every team to make sure you do your homework. Florida probably going to get smoked. Vancouver, I think they could take them to a game 5. Houston have no idea what's going to happen with them, and Atlanta probably going to take them to a game 5 too, because Atlanta just seem to do that to the good teams.
I mean, I think it's interesting though, because it's very important that London fix their control issues, because tiebreakers are always played on control. So you always have the chance to play that map type twice. So that in many ways, that's the map type you can at least afford to be bad at.
Yep. Yeah,
control is actually super important. Winning the first map means so much.
Yeah, for momentum, and then also makes it easier to take it to that map 5 if you have to, which means that you're going to be on control again. It's definitely a whole thing. So yeah, I agree. It's pretty critical, and I think if anything, that's the glaring flaw, because if you are going to consistently give up control, if London's going to give up control to the Dallas Fuel and the Toronto Defiant, which presumably they should be much better than, then it puts this incredible pressure on you to win all of the remaining maps before you go to another control map, which is great against not so good teams, but it's a pretty damaging flaw against top teams.
Definitely.
You win their first map, and then they slap you on 2CP, and you have a guaranteed map 5.
Yeah, exactly.
And as Monty implied earlier when talking about Fusion, since Spitfire is second in the Atlantic Division, and they're 2 wins ahead of Fusion, and they have like not exactly the craziest schedule, very, very good chance to enter the playoffs with a really good seed here.
Yeah, I mean, it seems likely that they, especially considering if we look at who's in the top right now, like Excelsior are going to end up with the top 2 seed, Titans are going to end up with the top 2 seed, Shock will be in, but Gladiators went 1-on-1 this last week, whereas London went 2-0 to start to catch up with them. Spark looks like they're probably going to drop a few more games. So I would say London has a really good chance of just automatically getting into the playoffs.
I like the way somehow, I don't know how it's ended up like this, but if you look at the 2 divisions, right, the Pacific Division where they've got like Titans, Shock, Gladiators, even Dragons, these are the teams that's like they're proven, they're good, you know what to expect from them, you know how they're going to play. The Atlantic Division is all hype, it's all smoke and mirrors. It's like, will the NYXL get over the curse? London, ooh, the peak is always so exciting. Philadelphia Fusion, if those DPS players pop off. Atlanta Reign, they seem like they should get it to get fucking hell. It's all just like commercials, isn't it? Where's the substance, boys? What's going on the East Coast? What is this?
Do you want storylines or do you want consistency?
Exactly. Do you want narratives or do you want actual sport in the other division? Like put it this way: if they did the reverse, Monty, of what the NFL did, they went back in time and they broke these 2 leagues apart. One of them is WWE, the other one's an actual sports league.
It's true. Like all the actual meat right now is in the Pacific Division, sure. And the Atlantic Division are just like a giant nothing burger. It's so fucking hard to see. Like, you're like, oh well, this team could be good in a specific circumstance, like Houston Outlaws. Like, are Atlanta Reign actually good, or can they just barely lose to top teams and they're never actually going to like get over that hump, right? Philadelphia Fusion, maybe they'll be good if they, you'd think, oh, finally it's their time to shine. Then they go 0-2 this week. Yeah.
Listen, Henry knows all about this. His team has won 11 games and they're 7th in their division. Meanwhile, 6th in the other divisions, Paris with 9 wins. And his team would actually be like 4th in the other division. So It's hard life out there in the Pacific Division. It's like a steel cage deathmatch in the yard or something.
Yeah, and everyone's improving at such a crazy rate, right? Like the only team, I mean, if Dallas, seriously, if Dallas picks it up now, then it would be crazy. Like everyone is improving. Like even Valiant, right? They weren't that great at the start of the season, but they've improved at such a drastic rate. And then obviously same for Shanghai at the start of the season, blah blah blah. Like everyone is improving. And then at the Atlantic Division, it's all over the place.